We go,
All right.
and I'll quickly do a intro. Hello, everyone. I'm John Higgins, contributing writer to Film and TV Now, and I'm delighted to welcome one and all to this special preview interview special with the team behind a brand new hand-drawn animated film, The Spine of Night. Director Morgan Galen King, whose credits include Exordium and Max Thrust, and writer Philip Gelatt, whose credits include Love, Death and Robots and Europa Report. The sense and style of the film, based on what I've seen in an exciting trailer, takes us back to the revolutionary animation of Ralph Bakshi's 1978 hard adaptation of The Lord of the Rings and Gerald Potterton's 1981 offering Heavy Metal. It's a bloody tale of magic falling into the wrong hands, and heroic cross-section from all times and eras are the key to saving the world and beyond. Hello to you both, Morgan and Philip. I just want to start by asking you, given that we've seen Pixar and Studio Ghibli take the plaudits for animation over the years, it's refreshing, based on what I've seen, to see something different in the mix. I mean, how did you two get together? What was the spark that got you going on doing something like this?
Well, I'd been working on short films for 3 or 4 years prior to this, and I went to college for art and wanted to do film, and at graduating, didn't have access to any of that, and so when I got to the opportunity to actually start spending some time rededicating myself to this work, I looked around and saw what wasn't out there that I loved, and it was these classic adult animated films, Bakshi's work, Heavy Metal, and I pretty much looked at the special features on the Fire and Ice DVD and thought, how can I reverse engineer this into something that I could do? So we refined the process. It's drawn by hand on a computer, but it's not like AI assisted or anything, as you're starting to see emerge. So we were doing it by hand, and I did a couple of shorts, and eventually one of them made their way over to film.
So I saw Morgan's short film Exordium, which is done in the same rotoscope style, and it takes place in the same world as the feature film, and it immediately, reminded me of the same things that Morgan's talking about. Like I grew up, loving heavy metal, loving Fire and Ice, loving sort of weirder genre fare, and it was insane in exactly the kind of way that I like a thing to be insane. So I got in touch with Morgan, just sort of out of the blue, sent him an email and said, hey, I love the short film. Do you want to do something else like this? And can we figure out how to do it together? And he said yes. So from there, we really, took the raw elements that he had for the world, and started to build a screenplay out of that, and then just launched into the crazy process that was making this type of animation.
Okay. I mean, one of the things I was reading the press notes, I mean, we understand this is a truly original source work. I mean, it's not based on anything like we've seen before. Like it's, 9 times out of 10, it's either a comic book or based, a graphic novel or stuff like that. I mean, trying to create anything original these days, it's a challenge enough. I mean, obviously, when the films present themselves to the world, people, the critics and the fans make it out to be an original difference and stuff, I suppose. So when you were creating it, I mean, what were the points did you have specific points of reference that you looked at this is a question for you both. I mean, was there a point where you thought, well, we haven't seen that in the movie? I mean, what sort of elements do you feel are the key strengths of Spine of Night? I mean, because obviously people are going to be seeing this. It's not due for release for about 3 more months. But what would you say are the things that people can pinpoint as original and that kind of?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we were certainly drawing on like the traditions of fantasy that I think sort of predate my lifetime for the most part. We're looking to the weird fantasy and horror literature of the pulp literature of the 20s, and I mean I love Tolkien and all of the associated works, but there's a sort of stripe of the pulp stuff that came back around in the 70s, that sort of the milieu that Bakshi was drawing on, and heavy metal, when it was both the magazine and the film. So those were clear touchstones to where we were coming from in terms of like the tone of the world we wanted to create. And then in a large sense, it was like, how would we modernize this? How do we take the parts of this that we love that to make it still true to that, while not making it mired in a lot of the same, either overly familiar or woefully outdated, um, you know, representation and depictions of things within this. So modernizing it while keeping the heart of, like, I don't know, classic sword and sorcery stuff, it proved to be a pretty creatively fertile territory, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that we should mention is that, the film it is not an anthology film as such, but it uses sort of an anthological structure, right? The film is telling a story that takes place through different time periods, all in the same fantasy world. So it's like interrelated short stories that add up to a world, to a story that crosses, centuries of time. And that structure was heavily influenced by Walter M. Miller Jr.'s book, Canticle for Leibowitz, which is 1970s era science fiction novel.
Man,
right?
I thought it was 70s, but it's actually from the 50s. I looked it up, I couldn't believe it was that old.
Yeah. So rolling all those things together, like a sort of a different way to do an anthology film, combined with flavors of fantasy that are not Tolkien-esque, really, I think, will tell listeners what they're in store for. It's more like Conan the Barbarian or Elric or something, and less like hobbits.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about the voice cast. I mean, obviously you've got some amazing talent like Richard E. Grant and Lucy Lawless in the mix. I mean, when did they get on board? I mean, how hard was it to convince them? I mean, obviously, because actors are often, they're very busy. If they're very key names, they're very busy or they're doing something else. I mean, how did you manage to convince them to sort of get on board for your project? Was it a complicated process?
So it wasn't as complicated as I even would have thought it was going to be. Part of that is because we didn't do the voice recording until COVID had started. So I think a lot of people were not doing much else because everybody was on lockdown, right? So, which isn't to say they would have said no any other time, but I suspect it was slightly easier given the circumstances. In terms of convincing them, it wasn't very hard. We went through their talent reps, obviously, and for each of them, I wrote them a letter that introduced the project, introduced the character they'd been playing, and sort of explained that this was an independent film that was being done. It's like a labor of love and all this sort of stuff. And then we would send them the movie in whatever shape it was at that time, so they were able to see how the animation was going to look, and like they could get a sense of what the final product was going to be. So and they all, I mean, Lucy came on very quickly, really loved the character and just wanted to be a part of the project. And Richard as well. I mean, it's funny, like, I don't know that Lucy or Richard really self-identify as nerds. Like, I don't know that they like fantasy stuff at all, but they, Lucy obviously has been doing it for years and years and really understands the genre, whether she is a fan or not. And Richard, is I just adore him. I've loved him for forever. Like, so many people have Withnail and I as their introduction point to Richard E. Grant, but strangely, mine was Hudson Hawk, which is a movie that nobody in the world loves. I don't think.
I mean, okay, I have to say, I saw it opening weekend in London, and I've been told by it, and I loved it. It was weird. It was a weird movie. I mean, obviously, Michael Lehman and Joel Silver together. But I remember being in an audience where we all lapped it up, and a friend of mine who is very critical actually said, to be honest with you, he's very critical of films, and he says, and he loved it. He was saying how great it was. So I thought, no, here we go. So yeah, I don't think you're alone in that universe.
Thank you. Thank you. Normally people have never heard of it or they hated it, but Richard E. Grant in particular, I mean, he's not playing a role in that film at all like he is in Spawn of Night, but in Hudson Hawk, he has some lines that I think about all the time. Like, there's one, he's in the back of a limo and talking about how if Da Vinci was alive today, he'd be eating microwave sushi with them, which is just a line that's so nonsensical. It's so beautifully nonsensical. So anyway, I was very excited when he said he would come on and do this voice for us. And then he just, brought so much to the part. He just has such a fantastic voice and really such gravitas when he's doing that type of role,
So let's talk a little bit about your production team, because obviously, you know, animation is a lot of artists. I mean, how many people did you have making this film?
Well, it was primarily me and two other full-time animators. So it was pretty much just a team of three. I mean, it was four people ultimately, but three at a time. And we had a handful of people come in and work on background characters intermittently. But it was a very small core team. And we had, I don't know, maybe 7 background painters over the process. But that's a much faster process. Very, very high skill threshold, but much faster.
Okay. So Philip, you've worked across multiple media. I mean, what do you feel are your strengths when you come to the individual medias of video games, comics, and films? Because you do have a knowledge and experience in those things. What are your key strengths? Where do you feel that they all are interchangeable? Do you feel that every discipline is different? You know what, you know, in terms of time and effort. I mean, where do you feel your strengths come from?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. I mean, they all share some similarities in that anytime you're asked to write a piece of fiction, there's always going to be a core similarity to it. And you know, it really sort of depends on what at what stage you're brought into a project. So like with video game stuff, I've been brought in very late in the process to like look at what's already been written and help refine it and help bring a sort of help ground characters and just sort of, you know, make it feel more alive. And I've also been brought on like very early in the project. And in those cases, it's really about sort of generating the core story material. As far as my core strength, I guess it would probably be adaptability, which is that you know, one has to be adaptable, I think, to work across multiple media, and then, you know, and sort of being able to come into each project and attempt to ascertain what that project needs and what it, I always use this phrase, which sort of like personifies projects, but like what a project wants to be and help it become that. And I mean that in a sort of like hippy dippy metaphysical sense, in that it's like not even what the people who are making it want it to be, but I often feel like projects eventually do have a thing. There is some like creative gravity to them, and there is a thing that they want to be, and you sort of need to, you know, figure out how to make it the best version of that, if that makes any sense at all.
Oh yeah, no, it's fine. Now, Morgan, you've been working in the realm of hand-drawn rotoscoping for a decade. You mentioned earlier you did short films. I mean, one thing I would say, are you planning to sort of, are you planning to do master classes of it for people to get introduced, you know, to stimulate young students? Because I think the great thing is I think after people see this, it will certainly hopefully draw people back to Bakshi and Potterton. I mean, heavy metal might well get a reissue. I mean, I watched it on first time I ever saw it was on a late night show in the UK called OTT. It was actually showing the Naked Woman and the Robot, and they showed Bob Godfrey's Dream Doll as well. So
wow.
this was my introduction to adult animation. I mean, I'd seen Lord of the Rings about 2 years before. I mean, is that something that you're looking at? I mean, are you going to are you going to sort of let people, you know, see the potential and what they could do?
I mean, I would very much be interested in working with anyone who wanted to learn how we did it and the sort of bring them into sort of the history of the style. And I'd love to be able to push it further. I feel like we're in a really interesting technological moment where the tools to do this, not by brute force, are emerging everywhere. I don't think anything is quite there yet, but I suspect we'll see tools to make rotoscoping less overwhelmingly time consuming happen imminently. I mean, if someone doesn't have it on their computer right now that they're working on it, I bet we'll see it in the next 2 or 3 years. Mm-hmm. So I mean, I'm eager to learn and to see where this could go. I mean, pretty much as anybody. I think it would be very exciting to both get the chance to really advance the form in a way that still feels very like authentically hand-drawn and handmade, and while still connecting it back to heavy metal and the Bakshi films. It would be absolutely amazing if this film could open up that world of adult animation to people moving forward. It'd be awesome.
Okay. Now we understand the film was independently produced. I mean, obviously, how did you raise finance for it? I mean, and how long did it? Because obviously, you know, it's raising finance is a challenge at the best of times, even for live action or any movie that you make. I mean, how did you raise finance for it?
Yeah, so we at the beginning, we just sort of started right with like a little bit of money that I put into it, and then I was like, we'll get this ball rolling, and then we'll build finance as we need to. So it was financed on a wing and a prayer, basically at the outset. And then as the production went on, and as we had more animation to show, so we basically like created a proof of concept as we were creating the thing itself, right? So then eventually, as we got later in the process, the casting of Richard E. Grant and Lucy Lawless and Patton Oswalt and Joe Manganiello and et cetera was a part of getting the final financing that allowed us to finish the film. But it was, because it took us, 6.5, 7 years to finish it. Part of that is because we didn't have a lot of money, right? So we were we were working with a small team, and we just sort of doing it the best we could with the resources we had. Which has its advantages in that we could do whatever we wanted. I mean, it's a film that was made with no guardrails and nobody tapping the brake, as you will tell when you when you see it. But part of the consequence of that is, not a lot of money and takes a long time. So.
Yeah. Okay, well, you did answer my next question, which was how long it took to create, which is 6 or 7 years. So that's answered that. Now, Morgan, you currently live in Halifax, Nova Scotia. That's what I was told. Yeah. So tell us, I mean, how much does an influence of a place like that have on your creativity? Is it somewhere, are there visual references in that area that you kind of feel really stimulate the mind? I mean, is that something that had an influence on your, on this project?
Well, on this project, not really so much. I was living in Philadelphia before I moved here. We moved here in 2019, so right before COVID. So like the formative stuff for The Spine of Night, not really. I didn't really have a chance, but certainly since I've been here, this is the first time I've lived on the ocean, and the haunted, foggy coasts are so evocative. I find it works its way into everything I've been writing and designing. Like there's definitely more of a misty nautical vibe to a lot of what I've been working on. So I look to the future for that.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, obviously, this is just a more simpler question. I mean, obviously, what do you feel are the key strengths of animation overall? Do you feel that it has over live action for you?
I mean, you can't really beat being able to just put a pen to the screen and make absolutely anything happen. I think that is so freeing. Like it's an incredibly entertaining process to work on. It's if you have the sort of mindset to sit there and do it for 12 hours at a stretch, at least. But I mean, it was also a very practical thing in that there's just no way we could ever put Richard E. Grant and Lucy Lawless on top of a mountain, naked on top of a mountain, and then immediately transport them into a primeval swamp. Like it, as in live action, would have just been incomprehensibly cost prohibitive. So I mean, animation frees you up in that sense too. So I mean, you can put almost anything in the script and actually be able to put it on screen.
Okay. And my final question for you both. I mean, obviously, from what I already see, I think I'm looking for. This is an project I'm looking forward to seeing when when I sit down and watch it. But finally, I mean, what are you both most proud of about this project?
I mean, for me, and this is maybe the least exciting answer, but just completing it, it was a very, very long road for me. I was thinking it was going to be 3.5, 4 years to complete it, and it was really, we're still drawing 7 years later to really get the final polish on there. So, by far the longest and hardest project I've ever embarked upon. So, it feels like climbing Mount Everest to me. So I'm proud of completing it.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that similar to my hippy dippy answer about projects having their own creative gravity, I'm always very excited when a film turns out, or a video game or whatever, similar to what you thought you were making when you started out. And I think Spine of Night is incredibly true to both Morgan's vision and my own vision for this fantasy world and for this style of animation. And I think so that's just, incredibly gratifying to get to the end of a project. I think in particular, something like this that was very hard to do and took quite a long time, and be able to sit back and think, well, we did what we set out to do, and we did it. We delivered on, I would say, just about every level that we, the goals that we set for ourselves are ones that we met, which is, you can't always say about every project. So it's incredibly gratifying when you can. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, this has been an honor. Thank Morgan and Philip. Thank you so much for your insights and time today, previewing The Spine of Night. It's I think it's already generating a lot of buzz from what I saw of the trailer, a lot of acclaim already for it, and really an opportunity for people to get a sense of what it was like watching Ralph Bakshi and Deborah Potterton. For information, the film had a world premiere at South by Southwest in Austin earlier this year and is set to be shown on Shudder in the UK in March 2022. Please do keep an eye on your local streaming platforms and elsewhere for news about this. And just keep your eyes open and do check it out. For more articles, interviews like this one, and reviews, you can go to www.filmandtvnow.com and support independent filmmakers, festivals, and the cinemas as they continue to gain ground after the challenges of recent months. And we thank you, and we shall see you again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is wonderful.